Hello everybody, thank you for joining me today. I do truly appreciate it. And I'd like to welcome in my new friend Harry. He's here for a little while, not for a long time. Anyway, I'm running late. Just lots of stuff going on, but I want to talk to you today about some of the books that I read. Actually, all of the books. I'm not going to pretend. All the books I read in May of 2024. I did some reading, got some reading time in, and I was able to get some of the books on that Books What Gots to Be Read list that I called a TBR. And I read some books that weren't on the list, and I didn't read some books that were on the list. So I did a little cheat, and I was unfaithful, disloyal to the TBR. But you know what? The TBR can kiss my fanny sometimes. Sometimes I just want to read something else, and I'm glad I did because I had some swell surprises for me in the month of May. So getting right to it, the first book I read, it's a small one, but it's one that I felt like I owed it to myself to read. One of my favorite authors, walking God's green earth, is a guy by the name of Philip Frakes. Ever hear of him? Well, if you haven't, by all means, hear of him. What a crime. One of my absolute favorite authors. And this is a little novelette, I don't know, short little story book thing. It's relatively short. Let's see, how long is she? 73 pages-ish on this publication here anyways, with an afterword. But here Philip Frakes introduced me, he may have already introduced in a short story or something, but a town called Sabbath, and a town that I really enjoyed, and a town that I need to get back to. And Sabbath is a town that it's got a story. You need to read this book to find out about the town of Sabbath. But reading this little story, I felt similarities to some other books. At times I felt similarities to A Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. It's not the same book, but I kind of was reminded a little bit of that story. And some other stories of the like, of youths getting themselves into trouble in a magical world, a world that's not exactly as it seems. And this town of Sabbath, sure enough, is one. And just to boil it all down in a nutshell, there's a legend about this black Commodore and bad things that happen to it. And as kids do, boys may, legends go around. Somebody saw this and something happened. And this group of friends that we're introduced to at the beginning of the story, one of them is told by another boy about seeing this black Commodore at a junkyard. And he didn't give a whole lot of details, but he was changed, not for the better. But these friends decide that they gotta go find it, as boys do, go on an adventure. And like I said, I won't tell you anything else more about the story, but a magical world, and a world that I hope we get a whole lot more from with Philip Frakes. At the end of the story, I think it was at the end, it's somewhere in the story, forward, afterward, something like that, he talked about other events that occurred in Sabbath. So he's got ideas for other stories. He didn't tell about the stories, he just told what they were. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from the Sabbath. And by the way, Philip Frakes has a Patreon, of which I am a Sabbath resident. That's what the tier that I signed up for is called, Sabbath resident. So Sabbath resident number 1 here. I was the first one to sign up. So I consider myself Sabbath resident number 1, even if nobody else will. I got that going for me, which is nice. On with the reading. Like I said, I had a great month for me of reading, meaning I read great stuff. And I read consistently, and I had some productivity. Although my productivity is embarrassment compared to many others on this YouTube deal. All the books they read, 40, 60, 80 books, 100 books in a month. Not me. If I read 6, I feel good. 4 is probably what I come to expect typically. I read about an hour a day, try to be consistent. Some days I miss. But I did a book review on this book because I thought it was so well worth it. This is the novelization of The Terminator, a novel by Randall Frakes and Bill Wisher, based on the screenplay by James Cameron with Gale and Hurd. And so a novelization, and I'm a big fan of novelizations, and I collect novelizations of movies that I dig. And this is definitely a movie that I dig, and I can't believe I haven't read it up until this point, because I do enjoy them. Even the bad ones I've enjoyed. But this one, I would have to say, is the best. Well, this is the best movie novelization that I've ever read, because this is the best story and the best novelization of that story. So the story of the Terminator, I love the movie. I love the story there. But the novelization takes all of the good stuff from the movie. It's all in here. That story is here, just as good. But this book is better, because this book gives us so much more. It gives us backstories for practically every character. So much more of the stuff that we are only left to either assume or ignore in the movie altogether. Backstories of the characters. Exposition, explaining what they're thinking, what their motivations are when they're doing things or saying things. And man, it's just so good right from the start, right from the very get-go. I'm getting a story that right off the bat, they're talking about it talks about the garbage truck driver in the beginning, gives him a name, gives him a backstory, starts telling what he's experiencing after it gives some of his backstory, why he's a garbage truck driver. And then he sees the big boop and things start to go down. He tells what he's thinking. And so it's like a whole new world. If you liked or loved the movie The Terminator, you owe it to yourself to read this novelization right here. You get all that story, but you get so much more, and it's good stuff too. So I strongly recommend that. Commodore, I give Commodore 5 stars. It was great. And I give this, The Terminator movie novelization, 5 stars. Better than the movie. Hard to believe, as much as I like that movie. Next up, I couldn't read The Terminator by Randall Frakes without reading T2 by Terminator 2 Judgment Day, a novel by Randall Frakes based on a screenplay by James Cameron and Bill Wisher. So the same main author did this movie novelization of Terminator 2. And as far as the movies go, I loved it when the Terminator, Arnold, was back for T2 as a good guy. Instead of trying to kill Sarah Connor, he's trying to save John Connor. So you take that awesome character that was a dastardly heel, and now you make him the babyface, the good guy. And it was great. There were things about this movie, though, that bothered me. I'll tell you right off the bat about the movie, not the story. This captures that story and improves slightly on some of the things that bothered me. John Connor was a little turd. This book describes him as a brat. So it's apropos, I guess. But I didn't like him. He was a little brat. I didn't like him at all. And the fact that the Terminator had to do everything that he said, including hop on one leg and stuff like that, annoyed me. It turned what would be the awesome hero at times into a goof, and that part bothered me. But I loved the movie still. I didn't like it as much as the Terminator, mainly for those reasons. But this novelization, I say, is not quite as good as that one, because this story to me is not quite as good as that one. However, this novelization is far better. It's more better than the movie than the Terminator was better than the movie. I don't know if that makes any sense. The Terminator was better than the movie by this much. Terminator 2 is better than the movie by that much. Anyway, this goes in so much more into Kyle Reese and John Connor and what they do together, smashing the grid and all that stuff, sending them back in time, what they expected, what John Connor expected to happen after he sent Reese back. It talks a lot more about the in-betweens on Terminator, when Sarah is at the gas station and gets the little Polaroid and storms coming and all that. It tells so much more. It tells about Sarah Connor's demise and how it affects John Connor and how the people that are close to him. I mean, this is a lot. a lot of story that wasn't even in the movie at all, in all this part before this movie actually starts. You get so much about the people that are with John Connor, who they are, what they do, what they think about him, the things they notice about him, the changes that they notice, and all that kind of stuff. You get all that, and then you jump into the events that take place in the movie. And much like the Terminator, the book covers the movie about the same. If you've ever watched Terminator 2 with the special features, you see how there's a switch in the Terminator's head that if you turn it on, it allows him to learn and be more human and not such a dork all the time, like John Connor said. The book also, that's in there. And so there's a lot of those extra scenes that are in this book that you wouldn't have seen in a theatrical release. But if you watched an extended cut with deleted scenes and stuff like that, a lot of those scenes are in this book. So it tells the story, but it tells so much more, and the so much more is so much better. So again, I strongly recommend, if you ever had any care for T2 at all, strongly recommend this novelization right here. And he promises, I'll be back. All right, next up, this was on my TBR. Paul Miller at Earthling Publications commented for notice that I said something about an author named Michael Marshall Smith. He sent me a message and said, hey, you need to read this. Do you have a copy? And I said, I don't. And he hooked the brother up. So thanks once again to Paul Miller from Earthling Publications. But Michael Marshall Smith's Everything You Need, a collection of stories, and it's all horror. And I've done a book review on this book as well. You can go back and watch that video where I cover each story and my thoughts on each story. And after reading this, I'm a fan of Michael Marshall Smith. I want to read some more of his novels. I've been a person who's had a hard time reading short story collections. I love short stories, but to sit and just read one after another, to me is exhausting. Some people really love it. But for me, the hard part about reading is getting into a story, and therefore reading many short stories is tough for me because I feel like I'm starting over every 15, 20, 30 minutes. And so I've always read short stories in short bursts, 1 or 2 or 3. Usually, in fact, it's been targeted stories. So you're reading about a character, and there's a book that's got a short story with that character in it. So I'd go read that story from that collection or that anthology or something like that. So I've done a lot of short story reading that way. And this is one of the first few that I've ever read cover to cover. And it was really good. They're really good. Michael Marshall Smith is someone that I recommend. I would say I got a lot of the vibes of that I used to get, or that I still do, watching on streaming now. Watching episodes of The Twilight Zone or Amazing Stories or things like that, where you get these short stories and they've always got a twist. Alfred Hitchcock Presents. They've always got a twist that'll sometimes leave you surprised and sometimes shocked and sometimes confused. You get that twist though, and these are full of those twists. Michael Marshall Smith does a very good job, and there are some in here that are awesome. Some 5-star short stories in there. Overall, I give the short story collection here, can't remember what I rated it on the video, but it's going to be probably 4 stars for this collection out of 5. There were some in here that I didn't like as much, some in here that I loved. But very, very good, worth reading. And like I said, I got to get me some more Michael Marshall Smith reading under the belt. Get some more novels in there. Now, this one is one that I'm embarrassed about. I screw up all the time, but I'm a 47-year-old guy, and I never read The Haunting of Hill House. This wasn't on my TBR, but I decided I had to remedy that. And so I did. And this is the Folio Society Hill House, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, slipcased. Very nice. I like it. It's a beautiful edition. And I've got others. I've got a Suntup's number edition, which is fabulous. I did a video showing you that one. That's my favorite that I have. That's the best one. But I read this one. The Folio Society version was much, much cheaper. And I feel far more comfortable reading a book that I don't have as much money invested in, just in case I mess it up. And I was careful. and I didn't mess it up at all. But The Haunting of Hill House is an old story, and I'd seen The Haunting several times as a movie, and I liked the movie. And quite frankly, I pretty much knew what was happening before it happened here. The Haunting wasn't exact, but it was a pretty good rendition of this book. Some beautiful illustrations in this Folio Society edition. Reading illustrated books does make it more fun, but Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House is a classic story, classic haunted house story, and one that's been retold in many ways, or mimicked or imitated some in many different ways. But I liked it. It's not my favorite. I'm actually, even though I think Hell House was flawed, Richard Matheson's Hell House, I liked it better, I think. I don't know. I kind of liked it better than I did The Haunting of Hill House. But I gave this one 4 stars out of 5. I felt many times where I just wanted to, come on, let's move along here. Let's get to it. And that's a knock, I guess. And I felt, to me, it felt a little bit vague on what they were getting at, what happened and stuff. But the Haunting of Hill House is a very good book, one that I'm glad I read, and one that I think that you probably should read if you consider yourself a reader. If you've got any interest in haunted houses, horror, it's not gonna scare you, make you tremble, but it does have it's got some really good characters, some good dialogue, some good inner dialogue, and overall a good story. What can be said that hasn't already been said about that? Most people have read it. Now the next one I read is Ray Bradbury, and this is actually the copy that I read right here, The Illustrated Man, a cheap paperback copy, and it spent some time in a suitcase, and I read it, and I didn't care what happened to it, so that's why I like to read the cheap paperback copies. But here I have a much nicer copy from Gauntlet Press. It is a signed limited edition slipped cased book, signed in person by Ray Bradbury and numbered. This one is numbered, let's see. This one is numbered to 600 copies, 422 of 600. Signed by Ray Bradbury, William F. Nolan, and Ed Gorman there. So glad to have it in my collection. I've loved Bradbury novels, and I've read a few Bradbury short stories, but this was the first short story collection that I'd read. A Glutton for Punishment. I actually read a couple short story collections cover to cover this month, and I've always struggled with them, and in the same way, I struggled with this one. This one has a wraparound story, and it's a pretty neat one. You got, I would say, transients heading in opposite directions. They meet up. One of them is the Illustrated Man, and he talks about he's covered in tattoos, and they come to life at night. And he can't keep a job because the tattoos tell people stories that they don't want to hear. It'll tell them a bunch of stories, and then it'll tell them their end. They tell them their demise, and people don't like that. So he can't even keep a job at carnivals, which is really only places that would hire him at that time. A man covered in tattoos. Well, they meet at a place where it's safe for the transients to catch a nap and then move on the next morning. And before he falls asleep, he tells this guy, "Don't look at my tattoos, please." Well, he falls asleep, and naturally, "Don't look at my tattoos" means look at my tattoos. And all of the stories are from the tattoos on the Illustrated Man, including the last one that tells how you die. And then the book at the end wraps it up. All these stories are completely unrelated. They're all sci-fi stories. Most of them in Mars and other planets. And then it wraps up at the end with the Illustrated Man story again. And I that part disappointed. The end didn't deliver like I hoped it would. And some of these sci-fi stories, most of them occurring on Mars, were fabulous, and some of them I just couldn't wait for them to end. So there was a point, much as a Ray Bradbury fan as I am, there was a point when I thought, I don't like this book. And then I kept up reading, which was good. The last handful of stories were awesome. So good. So I rate this 4 out of 5. Some of the stories I might go as low as maybe under 3. I don't know. They weren't bad stories. I just didn't care. I just wanted to be over. So I don't know what that means. Some of the stories are a 5. So again, I rate this one 4 out of 5. And Ray Bradbury, I'm a fan. And the last one that I read in the month of May, I just squeaked it in right at the buzzer. This one was on my TBR. It is Janet Ivanovich's Finger Licking 15. And this is the Stephanie Plum series. And I started reading the Stephanie Plum series, I think it was in 2002, with One for the Money. And I read a bunch of them at that point. I was reading them a lot, and then I went years without reading anymore. And then I'd pick one up every year or so and start reading them again. And I'm up to Finger Licking 15. I think there's more than 30 stories in this series. But every one I've read, I've loved them. I've read 15 of them now, including a couple of between the numbers novellas that weren't numbered, like Visions of Sugar Plums and Plum Lovin', and Plum Lucky. There's one Plum Spooky that I didn't read. But anyway, Stephanie Plum is a fabulous character. And she's a lady that's kind of down on out in Trenton, New Jersey. She's caught her husband cheating on her with her arch enemy. She lost her job at the tampon factory, and she can't pay the rent or feed her hamster. And so she's got to get a job, and she kind of blackmails, cons her way into getting her cousin Vinny, who is a bail bondsman, to hire her as a skip tracer or a bounty hunter. And she has zero skills. None. And she gets herself in all sorts of trouble. And in the very first book, One for the Money, you get introduced to some really good characters. Grandma Mazer, of course her mom and dad, Lula, Connie, Joe Morelli, and a guy by the name of Ranger. And these characters go on through, all the way through 15. These same characters that I grew to know and love, follow her throughout. But in Finger Licking 15, it starts off with a bang, for real. Lula, who was once a hoe, in her words, she described herself as a hoe. She was a hoe. Stephanie saved her in the first book. But she was a hoe. Now she does filing for Vinny and works with Stephanie quite a bit on chasing after skips, trying to get people who jump bail. And she screws up more than even Stephanie Plum does. But she witnesses, she's in her car, her old Firebird Camaro, I think it was a Camaro. She's in her Camaro, and she's ducked down trying to pick something up. And she looks up and she sees a guy with a cleaver chopping off somebody's head. Wow, that doesn't happen very often. And now she's scared because they're after her. And lots of stuff catches fire in this book. Whether it be cars, hats, tents, lots of things catch fire. Trees, all sorts of stuff. But it's fun. Stephanie Plum is what you read when you want to have fun reading. It's not serious. It's fun. It's fun all the way through. And you can take heart knowing that your characters that you grow to love, the pets that you grow to love, they're all going to be okay. Grandma Mazer's not going to die. In fact, Janet Ivanovich made that pledge years and years ago. Rex the hamster's not going to die. But it's a lot of fun. So if ever I want to read something that's not going to stress me out, that's going to let me have fun, that I'm going to enjoy from page 1 to page last and every step of the way, I'm going to read a Stephanie Plum book from Janet Ivanovich. And that's Finger Licking 15. And I probably rated 4 out of 5. Its fun factor of 5 out of 5. Out of all these books, the great ones even, I have more fun reading a Stephanie Plum book than I do for pretty much anything else. But it's hard to say that a zany, goofy, goofball book that takes nothing seriously, it's hard to say that it's a 5 out of 5. I don't know. but it's so much fun. But I would rate it 4 out of 5, which means it's very, very good. It's awesome, and I loved it. And with that being said, that's all I read. So I cheated on the TBR. I didn't read everything I was hoping to read, but you know what? I'm the one doing the reading, so I read what I want. Anyway, thank you for your time. I do truly appreciate it, and c'est la vie, baby. Doo-doo.